Taking a deep breath in, welcoming our YouTube family. Once again, honoring this beautiful moment, breathing in, and letting go. So today's talk is going to be about returning to the code, the living peace code. And for those of you who might be watching this for the first time, it's based off my book, Living Peace, Essential Teachings for Enlightenment in the 21st Century. And enlightenment in this instance is kind of more about living with a consistent inner peace, learning how to suffer well, because pain always exists, but we can definitely learn how to process it in healthier ways so that even if we're sad, we can still have happiness. Even when we're going through immense pain, there can still be joy in our lives. So just learning that healthy balance. And so I'm going to start just with a short little, it's not really a quote, but I guess it is. In Dunisha, the living peace code is our anchor for clarity, presence, and peace. No matter what circumstances arise in our life, we can always return to the code to receive its stabilizing influence. And the code, or rather the 9 tenets that the code embodies, is the first 3 is mastery of thought, mastery of impulse, mastery of emotion. The next 3 is ignorance is an illusion, we seek understanding. Chaos is an illusion, we seek harmony. And duality is an illusion, we seek transcendence. And the final 3 are releasing our attachments to the mundane world, releasing our attachments to what we think we know, and releasing our attachments to who we believe ourselves to be. And so in our student program, we actually take 1 month at a time through each of those core teachings. And there's journaling prompts, journaling questions. In the past, I used to have my students write an essay on each one. And not only are they learning the beautiful teachings, but they're also receiving life coaching through all of it. And so it kind of just encaptures the whole essence. But that's why I like talking about on Sundays too, because we don't always get to do all of the program for individuals out there. So we're going to just really focus on the first 3, mastery of thought, mastery of impulse, and mastery of emotion today. And the first one, I'm going to go ahead and have you write some stuff down. They have this nice little fill-in sheet. And so you're going to go ahead and write in the art of illusion and the art of belief. Art of illusion and art of belief. And what's cool is back in, it's most probably 2012, 2011, I started teaching Reiki at first. And this self-healing modality. And alongside the Reiki symbols and the Reiki teachings, I was actually teaching this before it was turned into my book. And so I had the code first and then I turned it into a book. But what was cool is always like the first class, whenever I'd have a class for Reiki, we would go into understanding illusions, understanding belief systems, and then of course, how mastery of thought plays into a lot of self-healing work. So just bring back some happy memories. And I always remember the art of illusion would always get people sometimes because I was notorious for saying, anytime anyone said anything back then, this was nearly 10 years ago, I would say, and how is that an illusion? And really, it's another way of saying, how is that a fabricated perception? How is that a self-made perception that is based off of our own personal bias versus tangible, actual, full truth, actual fact? And in my book, I spent a lot of time on this word illusion and how nearly everything that we experience involves some illusion work. Because nearly everything we experience, if not everything we experience, is filtered through our own perceptions, filtered through our own lens, and it's going to be formatted into some bias, positive, negative, neutral, anything in between. And so in Dunisha and in Living Peace, we spend a lot of time rooting out the hard illusions that turn into hard belief systems that cause ourselves suffering. And through us causing ourselves suffering, we often accidentally cause other people suffering. So although we preach neutrality and we do our best to always be in that neutral state, pretty much we also understand that no matter how hard we work, there's always going to be some illusion stuff falling in because of our own perceptions. I don't know if Buddha said this precisely in this quote, but Buddhism often teaches perception, deception. And when we're aware that that is occurring in every interaction that we have with the world and with ourselves, we end up falling less into those traps of egoic delusion. And what we might call egoic delusion is when we really get into that fight or flight mode, when we really go to battle with people in our minds, where we're constantly in a state of feeling threatened by reality. And we have a shitload of opinions that we're just projecting on everyone. And a follow-up question I also like to ask the students and for them to ask themselves is, do I need to have an opinion about this? Do I need to have an opinion about this? And more often than not, the answer is no. And so mastery of thought, in short, is literally just the agreement, the awareness that we can learn to not so much control, but direct the flow of thought. And what's interesting about thought is that it really is the building block of reality. Some people may have heard that before, but really think about it. Let's break it down. How is thought the building block of reality? Well, look at our entire society. Look at our entire species society. Everything that has ever been built, all the rules, all the relationships, all the foreign powers, everything in between stem from thought. Stemmed from a singular thought that then multiplied, and then that multiplied, and it just expanded out, turning into culture, turning into societies, turning into countries, religions, everything in between starts with a single idea, a perception that turns into an idea. And then when groups of people start to believe in that idea, it turns into rules, it turns into dogma, and all these things influence our behavior. They influence how we relate to each other. They influence how we show up, how we speak, how we interact, how we even ingest new information. If we have a very constricted belief system of the world, new information coming in may not even be allowed into our consciousness because we develop these defense mechanisms to push away anything that challenges our own comfortability. And so that's why thought is so freaking important. Because when you think a thought long enough, it turns into a belief system. And now I kind of explained the massive aspect of it, but let's talk about the macro and then the micro. So let's go into the micro. Ever have a thought that you're not good enough? And then you keep thinking it, turns into a belief system, and that belief system changes the way that you show up in the world, turns into the way that you might go to certain events or keep yourself in certain events, apply to certain jobs, keep yourself in certain relationships or avoid relationships altogether. And so maybe that thought never even was yours to begin with, but maybe you had an abusive upbringing. And then that thought was implanted into you by a parent that was in immense pain themselves. And so they're spilling that pain onto the children. And the children took those negative comments as belief systems. And those belief systems changed the way that they related to life. Because maybe they never had anyone in their life that said, well, just because you were told that forever doesn't mean it's actually true. And so a lot of times children who go through that, they have that awakening much later in life, which is beautiful. But it's interesting how a lot of our initial belief systems don't even come from our own choosing. And so what I love with our one-on-one sessions, a lot of times we'll figure out, is that true for you? Is that a belief system, a reality for you? Or is that something that was passed on by your parental figure? Or maybe passed on by culture or passed on by society? And so we're able to start to discern what is actual reality, what is actual truth, and what is perception that turns into a hard belief system that almost feels like it's very true. And so we have the art of illusion and then we have the art of belief all under the umbrella of mastery of thought. And so how we break that down is we start to discern what is illusion, what is factual, and then how do those illusions, those repeated thoughts, self-mantras, if you will, turn into belief systems that then alter our behavior. And so when we're able to break that down to the root, break that down the very basic level, then you really can start reconditioning your own mind, reconditioning your own behavior, reconditioning your own life. For those who are fans of the law of attraction, this is a great practice to indulge in, because a lot of our law of attraction stems from our own belief systems, our own emotions. It goes back to the energy we're putting out to life. So what you believe in, what you speak, you receive. And so what's fascinating is that when you can understand the very root cellular level of where these belief systems come from, you can change it and then shift your vibrational essence, if you will, and start attracting new experiences into your life. I always like to add that in because a lot of people who watch my videos are really into the law of attraction. And so check in. After check-in, I'm going to go ahead and have you write down, where is my attention right now? So that's the next bullet point. Where is my attention right now? I was practicing this just last night. Where is my attention right now? So if you ever notice yourself in stress, in any type of emotional turmoil, really in anything, even when you're happy, it's kind of fun to ask ourselves this question, because it's gonna show you where your thoughts are going. And so where thoughts flow, energy grows. There's a lot of different quotes out there like that, but think of it that way. Where thoughts flow, energy grows. And that's what they start to multiply and eventually turn into belief systems. Abraham Hicks, who's known for the law of attraction, talks about it's either 16 or 17 seconds, where they say it only takes 16 or 17 seconds focusing on a single thought before it turns into a full-blown emotion. Before you really start to develop that momentum into, it's kind of like a car is at the top of the hill and then it's in neutral or whatever, and it starts to roll down. If you catch it in the first few seconds, you can actually keep it from rolling down. But once after 16 seconds, that car is rolling and you're down there and you're like this, stop, it's not going to be pretty. And so if you're able to catch your thoughts much quicker, it's going to be much easier to transition before they turn into a full emotion. Now that's kind of getting into mastery of emotion, but that's just a little fun thing to point out. Where is my attention going right now? And if you notice that it's somewhere that you don't prefer, change it up. It sounds so simple, but it is often very difficult to do, mainly because it's hard to remember, because once you're in it, you're in it. But that's the way that we start to regain our power, if you will. Because a lot of the times the things that we're focusing on are quite negative, aren't they? And normally they're things that we don't want in our lives, but as we're thinking about them, we're actually giving our precious life energy to them. And so it just repeats that cycle again and again, versus shifting our attention to where something would be beneficial for us. And then the practice, which you can write down, is simply mindfulness. So go ahead and write that down, mindfulness. The other day I shared like one of those little comic things on social media, and it was this boy thinking a thought, I'm not good enough, with a sad face. And then in the second clip, it showed, I am aware that I am thinking a thought that I am not good enough. And then he was smiling. So right there, that's the essence of mindfulness. We're stuck in it. I'm not good enough. We're claiming it. But then on the flip side, we can create some healthy distance between claiming a thought as our identity versus observing a thought. And that's what meditation helps with. I am observing that I'm having a thought that I am not good enough is so much softer and allows some space in our heart versus going into I am not good enough. Or you could say, I am so pissed off right now. I'm so angry, versus I'm observing that I'm having very conflictive, confrontational thoughts right now. And so again, this sounds so simple, almost like it may not necessarily help us. But when you repeatedly do this every day and you change your language use, you really do start to cultivate a deepening peace within ourselves. Can speak, I can vouch for it. It really, really does work. And so I'm going to go ahead and just back up a little bit and read an excerpt from Living Peace, page 40. And this is just kind of an interesting segment that goes into just understanding how reality works and how our thoughts and biases, etc., etc. Actually, it's page 41. There are as many Alaric Hutchinsons as there are people perceiving me, since no one can experience me the same way another does. To illustrate, in my field of work, people have perceived me as a wise man, yet when I interact with people who have no understanding or interest in what I do, they may think of my teachings as nonsense and that I am foolish. Am I wise? Am I a fool? There is no singular answer here. Each person's reality is personal to them, so their created reality of me is also accurate for them. In fact, who I am to me matters very little to the observers, since they can only perceive me to the limited extent of their own mental and emotional bias. Truly fascinating. Every person who has ever interacted with me has a different picture of me in his or her mind. And when they bring to conscious thought my face and energy, each person will call into being an Alaric that is in resonance with their personal bias and vibrational aura. Deep breath. So in short, you're off the hook from other people's opinions, because it really is true that every single person that perceives any single one of us, always their opinion of us has more to do with them than it has to do with actually who we are. If you're interacting with someone that has deep pain, that's going to go one way, their perception possibly. If you're interacting with someone who has inner peace, they're probably not going to even bother having an opinion about you. They're just going to interact with you in the moment and enjoy whatever the interaction is. They're not developing this strong platform of, oh, I love that person, I like that person because they do X, Y, Z. But they're also not developing, well, I noticed this about them, it really bothers me. You know, we're creating those stories. And so it's really fascinating when you break it down to recognizing just how much of our life is perceived only through our own lens. And a lot of times when you look at the world, you're only perceiving it through one reality, through one lens, not realizing that there are over 7 billion humans on this planet, and every single one of them is living a reality that is true for them. Now, I don't give a shit about what's true and what's not true. What I give a shit about is what's creating peace, what's creating conflict. I never get into discussions of like truthfulness with other people, of what belief systems are true and what aren't. That's not helpful because you're just banging a drum. But what I like to inquire and inspect is, how does that thought bring you peace? How does that belief system cultivate harmony? How does that thought bring you pain? How does that belief cultivate conflict and separation? Because you're never going to win a battle of trying to get everyone to agree on absolutely everything. But what we can start to do is build bridges of understanding. And it starts by recognizing and letting other people and yourself off the hook of constantly worrying about opinions. Because everyone has them. And if we're always focused on that surface level issue of worrying about opinions, we're rarely actually looking into the heart of compassion. Does that make sense? So yeah, I always love that understanding that, and it's so helpful. You know, there are as many Alarics as there are people perceiving me. And if you worried about every fucking single one, you'd be exhausted 24/7. Anyone who worries about the judgments of others knows that feeling, to where you're trying to micromanage other people's perceptions of you. It doesn't work, because again, their perception of you has more to do with their own vibrational alignment than it will ever have to do with who you are. Isn't that interesting? So let's take a breath. Let's move on to mastery of impulse. So the two arts I'm going to have you write down is the art of breath and the arts of response. Pretty straightforward there. So anytime that we notice that we're in an impulsive or an addictive or compulsive creature, which many of us experience, one of the best things to do is to really use breath as our anchor. What I love about breath is that it creates a moment of pause. And in that moment of pause, it creates a moment of clarity sometimes, or even it just creates a moment to think. So in my book, I talk about the practice PPR, which is pause, process, and respond. That is one of the core practices that many new students really start to embrace. Pause, process, respond, PPR. Every time we notice our impulsiveness, our compulsiveness, or our addictive tendencies returning, we take a pause by taking a breath, creating some healthy space there, and then we process the situation. And then rather than reacting in our usual mode, we learn to respond to it in a different way, often using peace as our anchor for responding, always thinking about how can I add more peace? How can I add more clarity, compassion, understanding to the situation? So let's breathe that in. And so the check-in for this, how have I been reacting? How have I been reacting lately? I love this. And that's why when I work with my students and clients, I just enjoy it so much because people are just sharing, it could be something positive, it could be something negative, but a lot of times it's like their deepest core wounds. And I'm like, how juicy, how delicious is that? Because I don't view it as a negative thing. I don't develop a negative opinion around it. Rather than I say, oh my goodness, thank you so much for sharing, because that reveals so much wonderful information into your own psychology. And so one of the ways, if we're just kind of out and about doing our own thing, we can really start to look at how we're reacting to different stimuli in our life. If we slow down enough and maybe journal every single day, at the end of every single day, maybe write down 2 or 3 reactions that you had towards someone, towards something, towards life in general, maybe even towards yourself. And then think about it. Okay, based off of the Living Peace teachings or any type of teachings that I resonate with, how could I have responded differently to this situation? So I now see how I reacted, but how could I have responded? And even just that short mental practice, doing that even for this 30 days, every single day, you are going to gain so much clarity into your psychology, into your behavior, into your mental processing, that you're going to be able to start to shift away from being a reactive creature and becoming more responsive. That was so delicious. So let's breathe that in. And there's an excerpt, I believe, that I wanted to read. Page 56. I really like this. This is just a little short thing. Sometimes people feel the need to react or yell in anger because their calm speech falls on deaf ears. But they must ask themselves, what result does anger really bring? Anger may motivate and bring change, but it also kills inspiration and burns bridges of communication. It is important to understand that it is not enough to simply speak calmly. We must also practice compassionate listening and the freedom to disagree without interruption. To practice compassionate listening and the freedom to disagree without interruption. And so, I've been teaching this for nearly 10 years. The rebuttal is, well, anger gets the job done, Alaric. That's why I need to be reactive. That's why I need to be impulsive sometimes, because if I don't, then the people around me don't fucking listen to me. And I have them take a breath. And then I really always say, but what is the result of that? Yes, there might be getting the job done. Yes, there might be motivation and change there. But is there true happiness? Is there peace? Is there deep listening and understanding where everyone feels acknowledged? And so anger and yelling is quicker. It leads to results and it leads to quicker results, but it doesn't necessarily lead to happy results or a happy outcome or a happy journey. And we can notice it as well because anytime we get that anger within us, we don't feel well. And there's a disconnect within us. And we know that when our body feels stressed, it actually works less effectively. And where it disrupts our digestion, it disrupts everything in our body. And so we're not able to process life as effectively. I love how digestion and then we have the processing of life at the same time. There's a beautiful mirror there. And so, because I've noticed anytime I feel worked up, it's almost like my entire body stiffens. And then the flow is not present. And so in Dunisha and in Living Peace, we learn to make sure that that flow is consistent at all times. And another mantra I have students and clients write down is the quote, "There's no threat here." There's no threat here. For many of you, especially for those of us living locally or many people I met, for most of us, there really isn't a threat on most days. There really isn't a threat to our physical well-being. Sometimes, yes. But on average, we've developed a very nice society here for ourselves, and the threat is not present. And yet, most of us feel like we're under attack daily. And many of us feel like we're under attack daily by our loved ones the most. And that's the part where we really got to cultivate the removing the threat, because when we can learn to remove the threat from our loved ones, then we're able to actually cultivate that deeper listening. And in that deeper listening, we can start to find the root of the suffering in the relationship. And when we can see the root of the suffering in the relationship, we can start to shine light on it. And maybe the other person will not be changing in that modality either. Maybe the anger was cultivating some change, but maybe we cultivate peace within ourselves and it's still not freaking changing. But what's interesting is that, of course, not necessarily, because that's still their own journey. But you doing the work to cultivate your own peace is absolutely beautiful, because guess what? Now you have peace. And now you have clarity. And now new options for living life have opened up to you versus the repeated pattern day after day of the same shit, different day. So let's breathe that in. And one more thing, I say it all the time, but just in case there's anyone listening that has not heard it, one of my favorite quotes in Living Peace is, "Just because I think a thought or feel an emotion, it doesn't necessarily make it true." Just because I think a thought or feel an emotion, it doesn't necessarily make it true. And New Agers, spiritual seekers, have an extra problem with this, actually, that is not talked enough about. Intuition. A lot of us may use our intuition to justify things. I used to in the past. And we would just be like, "I'm getting this hit." And then we share that opinion with someone else. And because I've been in this circle for so long, I have had so many people do that to me. And it is so far off base. And so I've seen how that was more for them than it was anything for me. And how I've accidentally done that for other people, or how I used my intuition to almost force relationships in the past. I just feel this soul connection with you. And people do this, I just feel this deep connection. And we can use different belief systems such as past lives to justify staying in a relationship that may not actually be healthy for us, because we have the psychic experience or this intuitive experience. And so that's why this has really helped me, because I literally say, just because I'm thinking this thought, feeling this emotion, having this intuitive experience, it doesn't necessarily make it true. And when I started shifting away from always using, again, it was for me, especially using intuition to justify my not at peace behaviors or my interruptive behaviors or my nosiness or anything in between, staying in something that is not necessarily healthy for me. Then I don't know, it's almost like chains fell off of me, and I'm now able to go through life, taking life for the most part at face value. rather than trying to analyze absolutely everything and what people are saying or where all these things, I just show up now in the present moment without this perpetual analysis. And there's so much peace because of the result of that. I was someone that was in his head 28 hours a day, 8 days a week, not just 24/7, just perpetual. And my intuition today helps me immensely in the present moment when I'm in interactions in my sessions with my clients, and then I ask permission. But outside of that, I shut that shit down. Because if it's going 24/7, anytime I'm in interaction or seeing anyone or anything, that is not the time or place for it. It's time for me to be present and not coming up with stories or trying to read into things. Just because I think a thought or feel an emotion doesn't necessarily make it true. And so one more thing for anyone that this resonates with, a lot of people use intuition as a way to give opinion. And that is not helpful, and it's not compassionate. We're just using our intuitiveness or our psychicness to validate our own ego and to give our opinions even when it was not asked. And I've seen this done so many times, and that is not the compassionate thing to do. Because a lot of times we're going into someone's aura, we're going into someone's personal space, and we're speaking without invitation. And so my favorite thing is, do I need to have an opinion about this? Well, it's going to help them. Very rarely, unless someone's coming to us, especially in a professional setting, even if they heard the truth, it's not going to help them in that moment anyway, because they're not ready. And just because you're picking up on it doesn't mean that they're ready to hear it. And so isn't that cool? So just throwing that out there for anyone who it might resonate with. I know it's not everyone has that going on in their life, but for those that do, hopefully that's helpful to recognize. And Dunisha and Living Peace, we're really, really big into that. So let's take a breath and move on. Mastery of emotion. We're on the final stretch. So we're going to write down for the arts, art of forgiveness and the art of unattachment. Art of forgiveness and the art of unattachment. And underneath forgiveness, I'm going to have you write 2 more words, actually. Acceptance/resistance. I'm a bit radical because I teach forgiveness as an illusion. And its true name is acceptance or resistance. A lot of people spend their entire lives trying to forgive themselves, forgive other people, when really, if we were working on accepting ourselves and accepting other people, you're going to see quicker results. Because really, when we're in non-forgiveness, what's happening is we're in resisting something that has already occurred. And it's delusional to keep resisting something that has already occurred in the past because it no longer exists, but we keep rehashing it again and again and again. So this new storyline comes. Can I accept what happened to me in the past? Can I accept that thing that happened to me in the past? And then the psychology is, it's actually very rational to accept what happened in the past, because non-accepting the past is very delusional thinking, because that's happened. It's the reality. That unfortunate, very painful, even tragic thing happened. And when we accept that it happened, we can start to find some peace within ourselves versus the constant, I wish this didn't happen. I can't believe it. We develop those storylines of just wishing for a different past, hoping for a different past. And that is delusional thinking. And so it sometimes takes a journey to get from forgiveness into acceptance. But normally when I teach people this, it gives them a different perception that is sometimes very revealing and helpful to them on their healing journey, on their forgiveness journey. So really just wanted to put that out there. There's more information in my book, Living Peace. But forgiveness's true name is acceptance. And its true opposite is resistance. And then for unattachment, let's go ahead and read a story. Page 76, I believe. Here it is. The difference between detachment and unattachment, from my point of view. Detachment is apathy or aloofness toward other people. Unattachment acknowledges and honors other people while choosing not to let them influence your emotional well-being. Let me repeat that. Unattachment acknowledges and honors other people while choosing not to let them influence your emotional well-being. Detachment means I don't care, while unattachment means I care, although I'm not going to alter my emotional state because of your emotions, words, or actions. So in Dunisha, we're very well known for being monks of unattachment. We're not detached from the world. We're not super attached to it, because attachment often leads to great suffering, and we get into other people's business, and then it influences our emotion, all that fun stuff. We've all been there. Codependence, raise your hand. But unattachment is having the space enough in our heart and mind to recognize that another person's words, actions, beliefs, and lifestyle does not give me an excuse to constantly be out of alignment with my own life. Really hear that. How often have we used other people as an excuse for our own non-alignment? So when we practice unattachment, it's fully seeing something, even if it's very painful, but recognizing that I can hold space for this without absorbing this. And as a therapist, pastor, life coach, Zen teacher, holy shit, I've had to practice that. Because when I first started, my God, I was crying with my clients. I'm like, oh my God, yes. And I thought that was healthy, to meet them there. But over the years, I learned that it's so much more helpful to actually hold that peaceful space, because then they have a next step to work towards versus me being there with them in it. And what's beautiful, if I'm really in alignment, I could work with 6 people in a day, no matter what they're going through. And then at night, none of their stories are in my mind. Only my own thoughts are in my mind. If I'm stressed or drained or didn't eat correctly that day, I'll notice that all of their thoughts, all their stories are in my body. They're in my mind, at least for 24 hours. And that's not helpful. You can't function that way. And so everyone I met can relate to this, no matter what relationship you're in or work environment you're in. We often pick up the residue energy from the day. And so having that time for ourselves, for peace, to reconnect, realign our mind-body connection at the end of every day, or at the start of every day as well, is very, very, very useful. And that's why unattachment is so critical. But also forgiveness work, because accepting what happened during the day. Have you ever had a day where you're just like, I can't believe that happened? We develop a story, then we call up our friends, then we're kind of complaining about what happened, versus saying, you know what, this was a very unfortunate event or a painful day I had, but I accept it. And the moment you accept it, you're able to move on to the next present moment. Let's take a breath. What I loved is I had a beloved family, part of our first church, and I worked with the father of it, the husband, Rick. Shout out to Rick if you're watching. And he said one time, because I used to, for the mantra of mastery of emotion in the first living piece, I had in quotations under it, I am peace. So that was a mantra for people to practice while they're working on this. I am peace, I am peace, I am peace every single day. You just repeat it 100 times, 300 times. So he said, I am peace. I've meditated a lot on the phrase you gave us last week. It seems to have a very different connotation than I am at peace or I am peaceful, or even I feel at peace. I have tried substituting words for peace like I am happy, I am human, or I am love. It appears that you are teaching me that peace is a state of being that is not conditional upon other people's situations or the environment. This is not an easy thing that you're asking of me, Reverend. And so it really is. I am peace. I am unconditionally. It's an unconditional state of being, which almost seems impossible, but I promise that it's not. It becomes not impossible, or rather it becomes possible when we put into practice everything that we're learning here. along with the other 6 teachings that we haven't gotten to. And so the check-in to write down, the next bullet point, the check-in is, what stories are fueling my emotions? What stories are fueling my emotions? I promise you, any emotion you're in, there is a story fueling it, without a doubt. And the hard part, though, sometimes for those who suffer from depression, sometimes depression can be very numbing, and so we may not be able to kind of discern what the story is. But if we take a step back and we take time with it, even for those people who may feel a lot of numbness or apathy, you're going to notice that there is always an underlying story or underlying belief system about yourself or other people. And again, this has come from doing this work for over nearly 10 years now, but coaching for a little bit longer. If you really want to figure someone out, find the repeated daily story. If you really want to figure yourself out, find the repeated daily story, especially if you're noticing that you have stress increasing in your life or some hard emotion, or maybe you're stuck in grief rather than able to reach just the temporary sadness that returns occasionally, but you notice yourself in daily, minute, second by second grief. There's always a story connected. And if you can change the story, you're going to change the feeling. I'm sure every single one of you in this room and those listening at home or wherever you are, you've probably had a moment to where you were thinking something very negative for a while, but then all of a sudden new information came, or maybe you had a revelation, then you shifted it and instantly you felt better. Or maybe you were worrying about something coming up, some project at work or at school, and my God, you made yourself suffer. But then once it came and you did it, it was fine. Now you were waiting for the condition, new information be met for you to be fine. But that whole week prior, every day, the anticipation was just a thought. That was not actually real. It was based off an idea, based off of a fact that is going to be real. And we don't know how it's going to go. But during it, we decided the worst outcome and we're worried about it. And we just thought about it. And so that's so fascinating how anxiety, people with major anxiety, depression, anger, stress, if we really take our time to create some space within our heart and mind, you're going to always notice there's a thought, there's a belief linked to it. And if you can find the root of it and start to recondition it, you're going to instantly start feeling better. So let's breathe that in. And so for the practice, I'll have you write down, we've already mentioned it, but your practice is going to be unattachment. Practicing unattachment. And I wish I had a little magical wand that I could wave and be like, oh, this will be easy. Because I recognize that me speaking about this and even saying the practices and telling you the psychology, it doesn't instantly make it easy to do. But when you think about these teachings 24/7, I was obsessive about them. When you think about them 24/7, and not so much to the point where they take you out of the present moment, because then it can become its own thing and it actually distracts you. But when you keep them alive within you throughout the day, you are going to notice that even just having these fresh awarenesses on how to perceive life differently, it already changes your behavior slightly. And as you continually do this every single day, it gets easier and easier and easier and easier. But what happens to most people is they read my book, they take a class, they listen to a video, but then they forget about it until the next time that they pick up the book, take a class, or watch a video. And that's the challenge. And I have to attest, I even do that too. I have a shitload of Zen books and I love them all. But I read it, oh, that was delicious. I put it down. And then life happens. So really what we're learning here with the Living Peace Code is that you're cultivating a lifestyle. It's not just a one-hit wonder. You're learning to cultivate it every single day, every single minute of your life. And that's what it's about. Let's take a breath. So thank you for joining us. Mastery of thought, mastery of impulse, mastery of emotion. Possibly next week, maybe I'll go into the next 3 of ignorance, chaos, and duality. We will see what happens? I haven't fully decided yet. It would make sense though. So as always, links are down below. Please give a thumbs up if you enjoy this video. That's always lovely to see if it's being well received out there. Any comments below always help. And then of course, there's links for donations at the bottom. Thank you all so much and see you next week.